The dawn mist hung heavy over the sprawling ranges of Camp Thornridge, its advanced marksmanship facility shrouded in a gray veil that muffled the crunch of boots on gravel. Lila Kessler, barely 20, stood out starkly among the seasoned snipers. No patches adorned her plain fatigues. No call sign echoed in the whispers of her peers. She carried only a borrowed M82 Barrett 50 caliber rifle and a worn notebook stuffed with wind charts and ballistic data. Her dark braid was tucked under a faded cap, her face unreadable as she moved through the crowd of grizzled marksmen who barely spared her a glance. One smirked, muttering that the range record was older than she was. Lila didn't flinch. She took her place at the edge of the briefing, her presence as unremarkable as the fog. Chief Warrant Officer Merrick Vasco, his voice rough as the jagged scars crisscrossing his jaw, laid out the day's mission with a grim intensity. This op demands precision at ranges most of you can't even dream of, he growled, his eyes skimming the room. Extraction team needs cover from positions we've never tested before. Captain Elias Holt, a former competitive shooter with a reputation for surgical accuracy, pored over terrain maps with a furrowed brow. Beside him, Sergeant Caleb Rourke lounged with the easy arrogance of a man whose name was etched in the record books. "Only our best will take the primary slot," Vasco said, his gaze sliding past Lila as if she were invisible. Her assignment was predictable: observation duty. She'd be stuck logging atmospheric data while the real shooters honed their craft. As she gathered her notes, Rourke's voice cut through the murmurs. "Weather Kid thinks she's one of us," he said, drawing chuckles from the others. Lila's grip tightened on her notebook, her knuckles whitening for a split second before she forced her hand to relax. She exhaled slowly, her face a mask of calm. No response. Never a response. The morning unfolded in a haze of wind and frustration. Lila moved between observation posts, her pen scratching out readings. Gusts at 12 knots, humidity climbing, barometric pressure unsteady. The veterans struggled against the shifting conditions, their shots veering wide at the 2,900-meter target. When Holt missed his fourth shot in a row, Lila jotted a note. He caught her eye, his jaw tight. "Got something to say, rookie?" he snapped. "Wind splitting at the 1,600-meter mark," she said, her voice low but steady. "There's a downdraft near the ridge." Holt scoffed but adjusted his scope, his next shot clipping the target's edge. He didn't acknowledge her, but she saw the correction in his stance, the subtle shift she'd calculated in her head. She returned to her work, unnoticed except when someone barked for her latest readings. By noon, the range buzzed with tension. Even Rourke, whose 3,300-meter record shot had made him a near myth, couldn't land consistent hits. The conditions were brutal, the wind swirling unpredictably as clouds thickened over the distant peaks. Lila recorded the dropping pressure, her mind already running trajectories, adjusting for variables the others overlooked. She watched their techniques, Holt's rigid precision, Rourke's flashy confidence, and mentally corrected their errors, her fingers itching to hold a rifle instead of a pen. The afternoon brought heavier gusts, the air thick with the promise of rain. The veterans huddled near the gear shed, their voices tight as they discussed the upcoming mission. 3,000 meters minimum, Holt said, tracing a finger over a topographic map. "In this terrain, with these winds, it's a gamble." "We need a guaranteed shot," Vasco replied, his tone unyielding. "One bullet, one kill, maximum coverage for the extraction team." Rourke shook his head, muttering about impossible conditions. None of them noticed Lila nearby, her instruments humming as she logged the latest data. Her mind churned through calculations, angles, velocities, the Coriolis effect, numbers her mother had drilled into her on a dusty range far from military eyes. 3,000 meters wasn't just possible. It was within her grasp. In the mess tent at lunch, Lila sat alone, her notebook open beside a tray of untouched food. She sketched ballistic curves, her pen moving with the precision of a metronome. Holt approached, his tray clattering onto the table. "That call you made earlier," he said, skipping pleasantries. "How'd you spot that downdraft?" Lila looked up, her gray eyes meeting his. "The secondary wind flags were twitching opposite the primaries," she said. "It's a vortex effect, starts around 400 meters out." Holt's brow furrowed, intrigued despite himself. "How long you been with us?" 4 weeks, she replied. Before that, data collection at smaller posts. He opened his mouth to ask more, but Rourke's voice boomed across the tent. "Holt, you taking tips from the note-taker now?" The others laughed, and Holt's face shuddered. He stood, leaving his meal half-eaten. "Just checking her numbers," he muttered, rejoining the veterans. Lila returned to her sketches, unfazed. Being underestimated was her shield, a lesson her mother had taught her in the long, quiet years after their world fell apart. Anonymity let her move unseen, gathering the pieces she needed to rebuild what had been broken. The afternoon session dragged under worsening conditions. Vasco assigned Lila to a remote observation post, far from the action. She overheard Rourke's jab as she left. "Bet she's never touched anything heavier than a sidearm." If only he knew. At her post, she recorded the shifting winds, the pressure dropping further as the storm crept closer. Rourke's attempts at his record distance, 3,300 meters, failed repeatedly, his frustration echoing in the clang of his fist against the platform. Vasco called a break, the team gathering to dissect their failures. Lila watched from a distance, their tension palpable. The mission loomed, and they were nowhere near ready. She checked her watch. The session was nearly over. It was time. She packed her gear and approached the main range, where the veterans were stowing equipment. Vasco looked up, his expression sour. Lila stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Sir, I'd like to take a shot." The range fell silent. Vasco's eyes narrowed. "You ever fired an M82 Kessler?" "Not this one, sir," she said, her tone even. Rourke snorted, leaning against a post. "Let the data geek try," he said, grinning. Holt, more curious than cruel, handed her his rifle. "Don't break it," he said, stepping back. The others gathered, expecting a quick laugh. Lila ignored them, setting up her position with a precision that made Holt's eyes narrow. She arranged her mat in a way none of them recognized, checked the wind with a subtle flick of her hand, and settled into a stance that was both unconventional and rock-steady. Her breathing slowed, each exhale measured, her focus absolute. Rourke chuckled. "That record's older than her." Lila's mind flickered to a memory. Her mother, silhouetted against a desert sunset, guiding her hands on a rifle. A faded photo of a unit she'd memorized, faces she'd never met. A headline glimpsed in a locked drawer. Record disputed after failed op. She pushed it aside, her world narrowing to the rifle's weight, the wind's whisper, the calculations humming in her head. One breath, one gentle pull. The shot cracked across the range, the sound swallowed by the fog. Silence stretched as they waited for confirmation. The radio hissed. "Direct hit, center mass," the range officer said, voice tight with disbelief. "Distance, 3,620 meters. Confirm." The veterans froze. Vasco grabbed binoculars while Holt pulled up the targeting system. "That's 3 to 20 meters past the record," Holt muttered, stunned. Rourke pushed forward, demanding a recheck. "Fluke," he insisted. "No way. Log it," Vasco ordered. The system prompted for the shooter's name. "Kessler, Lila M.," she said, her voice steady as she handed the rifle back to Holt. A murmur rippled through the group. Vasco's eyes sharpened. "Any relation to Miriam Kessler?" Lila met his gaze. "She was my mother." The name hit like a shockwave. Miriam Shade Kessler, a sniper whose record had stood for decades until her disappearance after a botched mission. Her techniques were erased from training manuals, her legacy buried. Rourke whispered her old call sign, "Shades Kid," his voice tinged with something like reverence. Lila didn't linger. She gathered her notebook and walked away, the weight of their stares heavy on her back. She'd done what she came to do. The name was out there now, spoken in a place where it had been silenced for too long. Lila didn't look back as she crossed the gravel path to her temporary quarters, her boots crunching softly in the fading light. The fog had thickened, cloaking Camp Thornridge in a ghostly haze. Only when she was safely behind the locked door of her bunk did her shoulders loosen, her breath escaping in a slow, deliberate sigh. The first step was complete. Her mother's name, long buried under layers of military silence, had been spoken aloud. But this was only the beginning. She sat on the narrow cot, the springs creaking under her weight, and pulled her laptop from beneath a folded jacket. The screen flickered to life, revealing a folder of files she'd spent years collecting. Scanned documents, grainy photos, redacted reports. Operation Eclipse, the mission that had shattered her mother's legacy and taken her life. Lila knew every detail by heart. The impossible shot, the civilian casualties, the blame pinned on a woman who'd refused to compromise her principles. She'd rebuilt the scenario in her mind 1,000 times, each piece a shard of the truth she was determined to reassemble. A sharp knock at the door snapped her back to the present. She slid the laptop under her pillow, her movements smooth and practiced, before opening the door. Captain Holt stood there, his sharp features unreadable in the dim light. "Vasco wants you at the command center," he said, his eyes lingering on her as if trying to piece together a puzzle. "Now." Lila nodded, her expression giving nothing away. This was expected, another move in the game she'd been playing since she enlisted under her grandmother's maiden name. She followed Holt through the camp, the air sharp with the scent of pine and gun oil. The command center loomed ahead, a squat concrete building that seemed to absorb the fading daylight. Inside, Vasco sat alone at a steel desk, a thick file open before him. He didn't look up as she entered. "Specialist Kessler," he said, his voice heavy with emphasis on her true name. "Or should I say, Specialist Marrow, per your enlistment papers." "Both are accurate, sir," Lila replied, standing at attention. "Marrow was my grandmother's name. I changed mine legally after my mother's death. Using a false identity to enlist is a serious offense," Vasco said, his scarred fingers tapping the file. "I didn't falsify anything, sir. The name change was documented." Her voice was calm, but her pulse thrummed in her ears. Vasco's eyes met hers, sharp as a blade. "And your reason for joining this unit under a pseudonym?" "To uncover the truth, sir." He leaned back, studying her. Then he slid the file toward her. Inside were photographs, mission logs, and a death certificate. Miriam Kessler, decorated sniper, died in custody pending court-martial. Cause: suicide. "You believe that?" Vasco asked, his tone neutral but probing. "Never," Lila said, her voice steady. "My mother didn't kill herself. She was silenced because she knew too much about Operation Eclipse." Vasco's expression didn't change, but his fingers stilled on the desk. "You were what, 14 when she died?" 13, Lila corrected. "And for the last 9 years, I've been working to clear her name." "How?" he pressed. "Her techniques were classified, pulled from every training program after her court-martial." "She taught me everything," Lila said. "Before they took her, we trained together on private land. I built my own equipment, replicated her methods. I broke her record today to prove she was right." Vasco's gaze didn't waver. Operation Eclipse was a disaster. A 3,200-meter shot in mountain terrain, shifting winds, low visibility, Conditions not unlike what we're prepping for now. Exactly the same, Lila said, her voice tightening. That's why I'm here. When I learned this unit was gearing up for a similar extraction, I knew it was my chance. Vasco closed the file, his hands deliberate. Your mother was the best shooter I ever knew, but her record was disputed, her methods discredited. They said she choked, missed a shot that cost lives. She didn't miss, Lila said, a flicker of heat in her words. She refused to take it. There were civilians in the target zone, unlisted in the brief. She reported it, but command overruled her. They went ahead, and 18 civilians died. They blamed her to cover their mistake. Vasco's jaw tightened. That's a heavy accusation, Specialist. It's the truth. I have proof. The room fell silent, the hum of the command center's electronics the only sound. Vasco stood, moving to a wall safe. He punched in a code and retrieved a weathered file stamped with classified seals. Operation Eclipse, he said, setting it on the desk. I was there, part of the extraction team. I saw the aftermath. Lila's breath caught. Her research hadn't uncovered that detail. Then you saw the civilians. I saw a mission go wrong in every way possible, Vasco said. The report blamed your mother's refusal to fire, said it cost us the advantage. And you believed it? Vasco's eyes met hers, unflinching. I believed what I was told to believe. Until today. He opened the file, revealing documents Lila had never seen. Aerial photos showing a civilian settlement absent from the official brief, radio logs with timestamps that contradicted the narrative, and orders signed by a general, now a high-ranking official, dismissing Miriam Kessler's plea to abort. Your mother was right, Vasco said, his voice heavy. But being right can get you buried in this game. Lila stared at the documents, her hands trembling slightly. She'd known the truth for years, but seeing it in black and white, in official records, was a weight she hadn't prepared for. Who else knows about this? Just me now, Vasco said. I've kept this locked away, waiting. For what? For someone to prove what she could do. His gaze softened, just for a moment. Your shot today, 3,620 meters verified, shows her methods work. It's the evidence we needed. A knock interrupted them. Vasco secured the file before calling, Enter. Holt and Rourke stepped inside, their expressions uneasy. Sir, Holt began, we reviewed Kessler's shot data. It's clean. All protocols confirm the distance and accuracy. Rourke, uncharacteristically subdued, added, We also looked at Miriam Kessler's old techniques. They match what we saw today. And? Vasco prompted. Holt straightened. Her methods are effective, sir. We've been using outdated training that caps our range. Meaning, Rourke said, his voice low, if Miriam Kessler said she could have made that shot in Eclipse, she probably could have. And if she didn't take it, it wasn't because she couldn't. Lila kept her face neutral, but inside, a knot she'd carried for nearly a decade began to unravel. This was more than she'd hoped for. Validation from the very men who'd dismissed her mother's legacy. Dismissed, Vasco said. As the two left, he turned to Lila. Briefings at 600. You're expected, Specialist Kessler, unless you've done what you came for and plan to vanish. The question lingered. Lila had planned to leave after breaking the record, her mother's name restored. But those documents, Vasco's guarded trust, changed things. I'll be there, sir, she said. Vasco nodded, a faint approval in his eyes. Get some rest. Tomorrow you'll have your own rifle. As she left, he called after her. Your mother would have been proud, Lila, not just of the shot, but of what you're fighting for. Outside, the night was cold, the range lights faint through the mist. Lila felt the weight of her real name settling over her, no longer a secret. By morning, the entire unit would know who she was and why she'd come. The first light of dawn broke through the mountain mist, casting a pale glow over Camp Thornridge as Lila Kessler made her way to the briefing room. Sleep had been a fleeting visitor, her mind tangled in the revelations of the previous day, the classified files, Vasco's guarded admission, the weight of her mother's name spoken aloud. She'd come to the camp seeking justice, a single shot to shatter the silence around Miriam Kessler's legacy. Now, she found herself stepping into a role she hadn't anticipated, one that carried the hopes of a unit and the ghosts of a past she'd spent years chasing. The briefing room was a stark contrast to the open range, its walls lined with topographic maps and tactical displays. The air smelled of stale coffee and gun oil, the hum of fluorescent lights barely audible over the shuffle of boots. As Lila entered, the room fell silent, every pair of eyes tracking her to an empty seat near the back. Vasco's voice cut through the tension. Specialist Kessler, front and center. Your primary shooter for today's op. Captain Holt, your secondary. The silence deepened, a ripple of surprise passing through the team. Sergeant Rourke, who'd assumed he'd take the lead, stiffened, his jaw tight, but his lips sealed. The others exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Vasco activated the tactical display, a satellite image of a rugged valley flickering to life. Extraction Point Delta is here, he said, pointing to a narrow gorge. Your team needs cover from this ridge, 3,300 meters out. Conditions? Lila studied the map, her mind already calculating. Variable winds, sir. Mountain terrain means gusts will shift fast. Barometric pressures dropping. Possible light rain by afternoon. Manageable? Vasco asked, his eyes locking onto hers. Similar to yesterday, she replied, her voice steady. I can handle it. Primary target zones are here, here, and here. Vasco continued, marking 3 points forming a loose triangle around the extraction site. Neutralize any hostiles to secure the team's entry and exit. Lila nodded, her focus sharpening as she memorized the terrain. Holt stepped forward, adjusting the display. This outcrop gives you elevation and cover, he said, his tone professional but edged with curiosity. Sight lines are clear to all 3 targets. The briefing moved quickly, details piling up like rounds in a magazine. Insertion times, comm protocols, fallback plans. Lila absorbed it all, her notebook open but untouched. The numbers already locked in her head. This wasn't just a mission now, it was a proving ground, a chance to show that her mother's methods, discredited and buried, could succeed where others failed. As the team dispersed to gear up, Rourke approached her, his usual swagger muted. Kessler, he said, using her real name for the first time. I was out of line yesterday. About you, about your mother. I was wrong. Lila met his gaze, her expression neutral. You believed what they wanted you to believe, she said, echoing Vasco's words. He extended a hand, his eyes holding a flicker of respect. Good luck out there. She shook it, surprised by the weight of the gesture. It wasn't what she'd come for, but it settled something in her, a quiet acknowledgement that the tide was turning. At the armory, Lila was issued a new M82 Barrett 50, its matte finish gleaming under the harsh lights. She ran her hands over it, checking the balance, adjusting the scope to her specifications. It was heavier than the borrowed rifle, but the principles were the same. Her mother's principles, drilled into her through years of secret training. Holt joined her at the test range, watching as she fired a tight grouping at 1,200 meters. Your stance, he said, his voice analytical. It's not standard. It's not, Lila agreed, resetting for another shot. My mother studied thousands of long-range shots. She found variables most shooters ignore. Atmospheric layers, Earth's rotation, subtle wind shifts. Holt nodded, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. Those methods were scrapped after her situation. They were buried, Lila corrected, her voice low but firm. Not because they failed, but because they proved she was right about things they didn't want to admit. Before Holt could respond, Vasco's voice cut through. "Transport's in 15. Move out." The helicopters thrummed through the morning haze, carrying the team deep into the mountains. They disembarked at a concealed landing zone, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp stone. From there, they moved on foot, navigating dense forest that gave way to jagged rock as they climbed. Lila's boots gripped the uneven terrain, her breath steady despite the weight of her gear. The shooting position was as promised, a rocky outcrop with a clear view of the valley below. The extraction point a distant speck against the rugged landscape. She set up her rifle with Holt as her spotter, the rest of the team fanning out to secure the perimeter. "Wind's picking up," Holt reported, his eyes on his instruments. "Pressure's still dropping." Lila adjusted her data book, her pen scratching out updated calculations. Her mind was clear, but a quiet undercurrent of memory pulsed beneath her focus. Her mother's voice, calm and precise, guiding her through a shot in the desert twilight. The parallels to Operation Eclipse were unmistakable. The same treacherous conditions, the same impossible distance, the same weight of lives hanging on her trigger finger. "Extraction team's ready," Vasco's voice crackled through their comms. "Stand by for go." As they waited, Holt's gaze flicked to her. This wasn't just about the record, was it? Lila hesitated, then shook her head. "I knew this mission was coming. Same profile as Eclipse, same stakes. I've tracked every op like it for years, waiting for my shot." "To prove what?" Holt pressed. Before she could answer, the comms hissed again. "All units, mission is go. Extraction team moving." Through her scope, Lila watched the team slip into the valley, their movements precise, nearly invisible against the rocky terrain. Then she saw it. Movement in the tree line near the first target zone. Not hostiles, but civilians. 6 or 7 figures moving cautiously, unaware of the operation unfolding around them. "Holt," she said, her voice low. "Grid 042, northeast." "Confirm." He adjusted his spotting scope, his breath catching. "Civilians, not in the brief." The past slammed into the present, a mirror of her mother's final mission. Lila's heart pounded, but her hand stayed steady. "Command, this is Overwatch," she radioed. "Civilians in target zone 1. Repeat, civilians present." A pause, then. "Overwatch, negative. Intel shows no civilians. Proceed as briefed." Lila glanced at Holt, seeing the recognition in his eyes. This was Eclipse all over again. "Command, I have visual on 7 civilians," she said, her voice firm. "Request mission hold." Another silence, heavier this time. "Overwatch, negative. Extraction team is engaged. Neutralize targets as ordered." Lila's finger hovered over the trigger. The shot was within her range, clean, precise, exactly what she'd trained for. But those civilians would be caught in the crossfire, just as they had been 9 years ago. Her mother's words echoed. "The hardest shot is the one you choose not to take." "Command, this is Overwatch," she said, lowering her rifle. "I'm declining the shot due to civilian presence. Request alternate plan." The comms erupted with orders, but Lila held her ground. Holt, pale but resolute, began recording with his camera. "I'm documenting this," he said. "We'll get proof." Then, unexpectedly, the radio crackled. "All units, mission abort. Extraction team, return to insertion point. Overwatch, report to command center on arrival." Lila and Holt exchanged a glance, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't how it had gone for her mother. That mission had barreled forward, leaving blood and blame in its wake. Something had shifted. The helicopter's blades thumped through the thickening mist as the team returned to Camp Thornridge, the silence among them heavier than the gear they carried. Lila sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the horizon, expecting MPs to be waiting when they landed. Disobeying a direct order was a court-martial offense, and she'd known the risk when she lowered her rifle. Yet the mission's abrupt cancellation gnawed at her. Unlike her mother's fate, where orders had steamrolled over objections, this time, command had listened. Why? The landing zone was quiet, no handcuffs or escorts in sight. Only Chief Warrant Officer Vasco stood waiting, his silhouette stark against the fading light. Lila stepped off the chopper, her posture formal. "Sir, I take full responsibility for my actions." "Save it, Kessler." Vasco cut her off, his voice gruff but not hostile. "Your civilian sighting was confirmed by satellite 5 minutes after your call. They weren't supposed to be there, but they were." Relief hit her like a cold wave, followed by a surge of suspicion. "Just like Operation Eclipse," she said, her voice steady but laced with accusation. Vasco's eyes darkened, but he nodded. Exactly like then. Only this time, we had proof in time. No blood spilled. Because of you. Holt, standing nearby, spoke up. "She made the same call her mother did, sir. The right one." Vasco's gaze shifted to Holt, then back to Lila. "Your mother's call was ignored. They pinned the failure on her to protect someone higher up. Today, you changed the script." Back at the camp, the atmosphere had shifted. Word of the aborted mission spread like wildfire. Whispers of Lila's refusal, and the confirmed civilian presence rippling through the ranks. The veterans who'd mocked her as Weather Kid now watched her with a mix of respect and unease, their conversations hushed as she passed. In Vasco's office, the classified Operation Eclipse files lay open next to fresh reports from the day's mission. The parallels were stark. Unlisted civilians, ignored warnings, a sniper's refusal to fire. But this time, the outcome was different. "We're reopening your mother's case," Vasco said, his voice low but firm. "Today's events give us leverage. Your call, your shot yesterday, 3 secs into the 20 meters verified, prove her methods weren't just viable, they were superior." Lila stood at attention, her composure fraying as the weight of his words sank in. 9 years of relentless pursuit, nights spent poring over stolen documents, days training in secret on borrowed land, had led to this. "Who's authorizing the review, sir?" "General Langston," Vasco replied. "The same man who signed off on Eclipse, overriding your mother's objections." "He's got 3 stars now, and a sudden interest in clearing the record before this blows up in his face." Holt, leaning against the wall, gave a dry laugh. "Politics. Nobody wants to be the villain in a congressional hearing. Or have their name tied to a cover-up twice," Vasco added. "Kessler, your mother's name will be restored. Her techniques will be reinstated in training protocols. Her record, and yours, will stand in the logbooks." Lila's throat tightened, but she kept her stance rigid. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet," Vasco said. "This isn't over. Langston's cooperating, but he'll fight to keep his hands clean. You've stirred a hornet's nest." She nodded, unsurprised. Her mother had warned her about this. The truth wasn't enough. It had to be wielded. "I'm ready, sir." The next morning, the unit gathered in dress uniforms at the camp's memorial wall, a stone slab etched with the names of fallen marksmen. A separate plaque listed notable records, Miriam Kessler's name once among them before it was scrubbed from history. The air was crisp, the mist finally lifting to reveal a pale sun. Lila stood apart, her new unit patch sewn onto her sleeve, the weight of it unfamiliar, but grounding. Vasco approached, holding a small wooden box. "Your mother always said marksmanship wasn't about hitting targets," he said, his voice carrying over the silent ranks. "It was about protecting what's right." He opened the box, revealing a sniper's medal, rescinded years ago after Eclipse. "This belongs to her. And to you." Lila took the box, her fingers brushing the cold metal. The unit watched as she stepped to the memorial wall, where stonecutters had just finished re-engraving Miriam Kessler alongside her record. Lila's hand rested on the letters, the rough texture grounding her as years of grief and resolve collided. She pulled a worn photo from her pocket, Her mother, smiling faintly in a desert camo, her eyes bright with the fire Lila had inherited. "Your shot wasn't just a record," Vasco said, standing beside her. "It was justice." The sun caught the glint of tears Lila finally let fall, her breath steadying as she tucked the photo away. The unit saluted, their respect no longer grudging, but earned. She'd come to Thornridge to reclaim her mother's name, but she'd done more. She'd forced the truth into the open, a truth that would ripple far beyond the range. As the ceremony ended, Lila lingered by the wall, her gaze tracing the letters of her mother's name. The fight wasn't over. General Langston's cooperation was a start, but men like him didn't yield easily. She'd need to keep pushing, keep shooting, keep proving what her mother had always known. The hardest targets weren't measured in meters. They were measured in the courage to stand for what was right, even when it cost everything. The days following the ceremony at Camp Thornridge carried a strange stillness, like the calm before a storm. Lila Kessler felt the shift in the air. Whispers in the mess hall, sidelong glances from soldiers who once ignored her. Her shot at 3,620 meters and her refusal to fire on civilians had turned her from an invisible observer into a name that echoed across the base. But the weight of her mother's restored legacy sat heavy on her shoulders, a reminder that vindication was only the first step. The truth about Operation Eclipse was out, but the fight to hold those responsible accountable was just beginning. Lila returned to her duties with a new rhythm. Vasco assigned her to train alongside the unit's top shooters, her mother's techniques now under scrutiny by men who'd once dismissed them. In the briefing room, she stood before a tactical display, outlining adjustments for long-range shots, accounting for atmospheric layering, subtle wind vortices, and the Earth's rotation. Captain Holt took notes with the focus of a student, while Sergeant Rourke, though quieter now, listened intently, his earlier arrogance replaced by grudging respect. "Your mother's methods," Holt said after a session, wiping sweat from his brow as they packed up. "They're like rewriting the rule book. Why'd they bury this?" Lila adjusted her rifle sling, her movements deliberate. "Because they proved she was right about Eclipse." Admitting that meant admitting someone else was wrong. Her voice held no bitterness, only fact. Rourke, lingering nearby, spoke up. "I looked at the old logs. Your mother's calculations were flawless. If they'd listened to her, those civilians might still be alive." Lila met his gaze, surprised by the admission. She tried to tell them. They didn't want to hear it. The training range became her proving ground. Under Vasco's watchful eye, Lila demonstrated her mother's techniques, unorthodox stances, precise breathing patterns, and a near-obsessive attention to environmental variables. The other shooters struggled to adapt, their muscle memory rooted in outdated methods. But shot by shot, they began to see results, tighter groupings at 2,800 meters, then 3,000. Holt landed a clean hit at 3,200 meters, his first beyond his previous limit. He turned to Lila, a rare grin breaking through. "Guess I owe you a beer." "Teach it to the others," she replied, her tone even. "That's what matters." Off the range, Lila's evenings were spent in her quarters, poring over the Eclipse files Vasco had entrusted to her. The documents painted a damning picture. General Langston's orders to proceed, despite civilian risks, falsified intel reports, and a rushed cover-up that pinned the blame on Miriam Kessler. Lila cross-referenced them with her own findings. Emails intercepted through back channels, testimonies from retired soldiers who'd been silenced. Each piece was a step toward a formal inquiry, but she knew Langston wouldn't go down without a fight. Men like him built careers on burying truths. One night, Vasco summoned her to the command center. The room was dim, lit only by a desk lamp that cast long shadows across the concrete walls. He slid a new file across the desk, this one marked with fresh security seals. "Preliminary findings from the Eclipse Review," he said. "Langston's agreed to testify, but he's pushing a narrative that your mother acted alone, against orders." Lila's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "He's lying. The radio logs show he overruled her directly. He's banking on those logs being buried deeper than we can dig," Vasco said. "But your shot, your actions on the mission, they're forcing his hand. Congress is sniffing around now. They want answers." "What's our move?" Lila asked, her mind already racing through strategies. "Keep doing what you're doing," Vasco said. "Train the team. Prove your mother's methods are the future. Every shot you land is evidence. Every shooter you train is a witness." Lila nodded, but a flicker of doubt crossed her mind. She'd come to Thornridge to clear her mother's name, not to lead a revolution in sniper training. Yet the two were intertwined now. Her mother's legacy was tied to her ability to keep pushing forward, to make the unit see what had been lost when Miriam Kessler was erased. The next morning, the range was alive with activity. A new mission loomed, another extraction in similar terrain, and Vasco had named Lila as primary shooter again. As she set up her position, Holt approached, his spotting scope slung over his shoulder. "You're not just here for her, are you?" he asked, his voice low. "This is bigger than one name." Lila adjusted her scope, her eyes fixed on the distant target. "It's about making sure no one else gets buried for doing the right thing." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Let's make this shot count." The wind was steadier today, but the pressure was low, the air heavy with the threat of rain. Lila settled into her stance, her mother's voice a quiet hum in her mind. "Feel the rhythm of the earth, not just the wind." She adjusted for a slight cross-current, her calculations automatic, her focus absolute. The shot cracked across the range, the radio confirming a direct hit at 3,400 meters. The team murmured, impressed but no longer shocked. Lila Kessler was no fluke. As the days turned to weeks, the unit transformed. Rourke, once her loudest critic, began incorporating her techniques, his shots creeping closer to her record. Holt trained a new batch of recruits, teaching them the Kessler method from the start. The range logbooks filled with new entries, each one a testament to a legacy reclaimed. But Lila knew the real battle wasn't on the range. It was in the hearing rooms, where General Langston